All right, welcome back to the Reality Show Life Coach podcast. Today we're going to talk about Netflix's Love is Blind season 6, episodes 1 and 2. With me today, I'm so excited. I have a special guest, Matt Kjar. Matt, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, so I'm Matt Kjar. I do video and television production, and I am also a certified life coach. I actually help coaches with their videos. That's my main bread and butter. I think I help people be seen, be heard, and tell better stories. And I'm super excited about this because I've worked on lots of reality television shows. So it's kind of fun to, as I watch everything, I'm always watching it from a production lens, and it was kind of fun because the invitation was basically to watch it from a coaching lens, and so I was like watching from a coaching lens and a production lens, and I'm super excited.
That's one of the reasons I was excited to have you on the show because I think you and I have known each other for probably what, 6, 7 years at this point. And
Yeah.
I've seen you in action. Like I've seen you, we've worked together in different capacities with life coach school with Katrina Ubel. And, I've seen you in the video side of things, but I have yet to have like Matt with the coach hat on. And so, like, this is a treat for me to hear both sides of those things. But we also have another point of like commonality, which I think we probably first bonded on, which is the RVing thing. So, just
Yeah.
say briefly, like, what you and your family did, because I think it's so cool.
Totally, yeah. And this was actually kind of because I was working on a reality show at the time. My wife was like, "Well, what ideas do you have for your own show?" And I was like, "Oh, I have this idea where we would take our kids and we would sell everything and we would go on the road for a year and we'd call it 50 by 52." And she was like, "That sounds like a horrible idea," because she's like, "I know what it'll be like. I will be in a motorhome with kids and you will be out filming amazing things." And then several years later, she was like, "We should do that," and I was like, "Wait, that sounds like a horrible idea." Because at that point, I had my own like I was working on a couple of other shows. We actually some that we weren't won Emmys for, so I was like super excited about that. And she was like, "No, this is the time. If we don't do it now, we're never going to do it." So we sold everything and we went on the road for a year. We actually were in negotiations with a couple of networks to do it as a television show, and networks take a long time. And we were like, if we don't do it now, we're not going to do it. And so it was funny, like we're I don't know, 3 months into our trip, and I get a message from the showrunner that I was working with, and she's like, "The network is all in. They're really excited about it." I'm like, "Great. I'm in Minnesota right now, so if they want to send a crew up," and she's like, "Wait, what?" Anyway, so um,
They're like, oh, okay, I see.
they're like, "Oh, they really wanted to do this. They weren't waiting for a television show to pay for this. They actually made this happen." So, and I love that, like, you, like, just being able to think about life outside of the box and be like, "Okay, how do I want to live my life?" So that's what you guys are doing. Like, you're in Mexico right now, you said?
Yeah, we're in Mexico. We're actually traveling with like a caravan of people. There's two other RVs with us. And I mentioned before we recorded, like we've been watching Love is Blind all together, all 6 of us. We watched the first 2 episodes, the one we're going to talk about today, inside of our RV, which is a little crowded with 6 people. And then yesterday, we set up a projector and watched it. We have like this little outdoor kind of palapa on the beach. So we watched Love is Blind on the beach, which is super fun. So it's just you just never know what you're gonna get in this lifestyle. And like,
It's
I
true.
can yeah, which but yeah, for 6 humans in one RV is no joke. We did that just to watch a TV show. You did that for a year. So
Yeah.
different scenario.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about this show. So had never seen the show before watching it. I would love to get your just like hot take on it. Like, what did you
Totally.
think?
Yeah, I first of all, like when I was like, okay, I'm gonna hit it, like I'm not gonna do any research. I'm just gonna hit it blind, like they do, like the people who are
Yeah.
watching the show. And so I just turned on the episode and I started watching. And the very first thing that I was impressed with was the production quality. Like the
Mm.
production value is huge. One of the things that I'm always thinking, anytime that I'm at an event or I'm at um, watching any sort of production, I watch for the ways that they could have done the production, and so that was one of the very first things that I thought about. And then I did some research, and these pods, like they built these pods so that all of them are soundproof, so nobody
Yeah.
can hear anybody in any of the other pods, and then there's just one speaker. And they're connected to the microphone on the other side so that that way they just hear each other through a speaker. Um, and so I was watching, I was like, oh, okay, I can see the slats where the light is. So that's where the camera has to be. And then anytime that they have, one of the production values that they did, that they do really well with this, is that they have a lot of, we call it bokeh. So lots of lights in front of the
Mm,
camera. And that gives a little bit of a blurry, like you see it when they're moving the camera back and forth. And actually they have like these little crystals and these little like lights that they have to
yeah.
pan back and forth in front of, so that that way it kind of gives you, because otherwise it could get very boring if you think about somebody being in a pod, a 12 by 12 pod, and just talking to each other. Like visually that's not the most compelling.
Right.
And so they had to think about how they could like up the production value. One of the things I always talk about is like you want to balance the content with the production value. Sometimes
Mm,
people are like high on content but low on production value, and sometimes things are like high on production value and low on content. You want to have a balance of the two, and I think they struck that balance really well.
okay. I love to hear this side of things because it is like, as you say this, yes, it would be very boring just watching two people back and forth on it. If anybody's like just dropping into this and like we're like, what are they talking about? Okay, so Love is Blind, premise of the show is that they bring in single people. I think they're in Charlotte, North Carolina, or North Carolina in general, men and women, and they go into these pods and they don't see each other. They just hear each other's voices. They have conversations. And the idea is that they would fall in love with somebody and then ask the other person to marry them. And that's how they are revealed to each other. And then they carry on with life from there with the idea that they would get married in what, like 4 weeks? I think it's
Four
about four
weeks, yeah.
weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I don't know about you, but for me watching this, because they're like, oh, it's an experiment, I'm just like, I totally would have done this if I was single in my 30s or 20s or whatever. Um, I have shared this on the podcast before. My husband and I have like kind of I live in an unconventional life. We met in an unconventional way. We met, well, in a normal way, which normal now is online dating, but we really only spent like a couple days apart before we were just basically living together because I was traveling on the road in my RV and there was no other way to date somebody who doesn't travel full time except for to basically, you know, move right in. So I did that. And so for me, I'm watching this going, well, that's an interesting experiment. I think I would have done it. But I don't know, Matt, what do you think? Would you think you would have ever considered something like this?
Maybe late, like if I had gotten to dating like later in my life, and I mean, I, it depends on what your scale is. Like Lindsay and I got married when we were 24. So for some
Yeah.
people, they're like, that's super young. And for other people, they're like, oh, wow, you were an old maid. I'm like, okay, what
Yeah.
depend, seeing where your balance is in your brain. But I think if I'd gotten, most of the people who are on the show seem like they're a little bit like in their 30s and
Mm,
ready to like settle down. Um, and I think if I were in that stage, I think I might have been open to it. I think the thing that's so interesting about it is that it's only 10 days. That they have 10
right.
days in the pod time. And so like thinking about, I in some ways, like I think about Lindsay and I like I would have loved to spend like 10 days nonstop asking questions and like
Mm,
being able to engage that way. And I think in some ways that's like a beautiful experiment to be able to say, okay, everything is gone. You have no cell phone, you have no connection to the outside world. You have like these 10 people that you're dating, and then 10 people, 10 men that are your, or women that you're in the room with,
yeah.
right? And so then all of a sudden it's like one of the guys in episode 2, I think it is, talks about how it's kind of like we're all dating each other. Like we're dating the
Hmm.
women, but then we're also
Mm,
like hanging out with the guys. And so it's like I'm dating you and I'm dating her like as friends or whatever. Um, and I thought that was a really interesting like premise to think about, you know, being thrust into this environment. Because some of the shows that I worked on, like that's one of the things that you that you do for a reality show is you put people in a strange situation that they normally wouldn't be
Yeah.
in, and then you're like, okay, let's see what happens. So
Are you able to share like what shows you worked on?
yeah, so I worked on a show back in 2008. I worked on a show called Home Team that was syndicated nationally, and um, it was like a reality kind of home show, like a home renovation show, and we surprised a family at the end. I've worked as an assistant editor and like a DIT. I filled in for one of my friends as a DIT, which is like a mix between an editor and a digital information
Mhm.
technologist is what it's called, on a show called Diesel Brothers. And then I worked as a producer with the Sundance Channel on it was basically festival updates. So we would do all the festival dailies behind the scenes. I was
Yeah.
on the red carpet interviewing like Gwyneth Paltrow and Danny DeVito,
Woo.
and my kids are always like, we watch something and they're like, did you ever interview him? I'm like, yeah, Ewan McGregor, I interviewed him. Did you ever, so it's kind of fun that way. And then I worked on one of my favorite ones that I worked on, I think of more as like a docu-follow show. That's one of the ones
Mhm.
that we won the Emmys for. And it's not nationally syndicated. Well, no, I guess it is nationally syndicated, but it's on a smaller network. It was called The Story Trek. So we would randomly travel the country, knock on people's doors, and ask them to tell us their story, because the theory was everyone has a story.
Yeah.
So that was one of my favorites. And then a couple of others. I worked on one that was kind of like it was called Relative Race. That was kind of like it was kind of like The Amazing Race, but it was just
Mm.
across the country. So lots of different ones, and I mean other ones that I would fill in on, and I don't really count those because I didn't feel really good about those ones. Some there I have an audio friend who would talk about how like there are some shows that you come home and after you finish you like want to take a shower because you feel so dirty after filming it, and I would always try to avoid those. So I don't talk about those ones. So yeah.
Would you say if you had worked on Love is Blind, it would be a shower show?
I don't think so. Well, I mean, and I could be wrong. The thing that's so interesting is that you don't, from the other side, like from the editing side, and once everything gets on camera, you would not know. Well, I can't say that. I
Mm.
typically I don't think you would know that it feels like manipulative. There are always some producers who are just like, okay, I want you to go in there and I want you to say this thing and I want you to do this thing. And there was one of my audio friends talked about this one show that he was filming, and they started talking about something, and the person was just kind of talking blasé on the phone about it, and he goes, "Oh, I actually have the cameras rolling." And all of a sudden the person was like, "Oh, it was such a bad day. Oh my gosh." And like totally just turned it on, and he said, I immediately was like, "Oh." And so that was one of the
Mm.
things that and it's funny because there were a couple of people in the episodes that we watched that I caught a whiff of that I caught a whiff of,
Oh,
like,
like what?
yeah, like in, I think it was episode 2, when Matthew was like, I think America likes an underdog, like that to me felt like breaking the third wall. So
Mhm.
in television, and we talk about like there's or the fourth wall in video production, and also in movies and in plays, we talk about how there's this fourth wall. So everybody knows it's kind of this experiment. We're all watching this viewership, but then breaking that wall is like when somebody calls it out and says, "Oh, look, there's a camera over there," or "Oh, look, America is rooting for me," or something like that. That's like breaking the fourth wall, because all of a sudden it takes you out of that
Yeah.
experiment. Like in a play, it might be done really well, like where they do Into the Woods is a great example of
Mhm.
this. I love Into the Woods, and there's a scene, there's this narrator and he's talking about all this stuff, and all of a sudden the characters turn on the narrator and they're like, wait, who are you? And he's like, oh, I'm the narrator. I'm the one who tells this story. And they're like, some of us don't like how you're telling it. And they like take the narrator and sacrifice him to the giant. That's breaking the fourth wall, right? So we
Yeah.
suddenly know that there's like this outside viewership, and uh, and it takes us out of the experience. And so most of the time we don't really want to do that. And that in the episode, it was episode 2. Matthew does
Yeah.
that, and it's
It was
as
weird.
it was very weird, right?
Yes, because I was going to ask you about that. The editing on his whole storyline is very interesting to me. I mean, like I kept kind of thinking like, okay, I want to look at it from a coaching perspective, but I have a lot of feelings about this. Like I have a lot of thoughts about this. I don't feel very trustful of like what is happening here. And I was like, I have to ask you, Matt, where I'm glad he goes by Matthew, not Matt, so that we have a differentiation between your name and his name. But I was like, I have to ask you about this because I felt like I couldn't trust anything that was upcoming with this because and if you haven't watched the episode, basically they show Matthew and AD like having this relationship, getting to a point where maybe they could have left together. And suddenly there's this jarring moment where apparently there's this other contestant or person, cast member, Amber, who's having a parallel experience that they never show. The only way we find out about it is that AD and Amber are in the women's quarters talking about it and comparing notes. And to me, I'm just like, did that actually happen? Did it not happen? You have footage. I know you have footage because you have thousands of hours of footage. Why aren't you showing it? And I just really want to get your perspective. Like, what goes into that decision making? Like, why is that? Why do you think they did that way?
Yeah. I think this is really interesting because as I was watching that and I was hearing that, I two things went through my head. Like one was, is this a story that the producers wanted her to tell and to cause drama? Or
Amber or
did this
AD? Amber.
Amber,
Mm-hmm.
Amber, yeah. Or did this actually happen? And so we'd never see the footage, so we don't actually know, right? And I mean, ultimately when we watch these shows, they are telling a story, they are building a narrative, and they do have to say, okay, what is going to be effective, what's not going to be effective. And so they could have been like, okay, well, let's show that, like, after she says these things, let's show that. But I think from an editing perspective, I think that they wanted us to keep guessing too,
Mm,
because if they'd showed that they had the exact same conversation, in some ways we would not. The way that they built Matthew's character up, and obviously these are people, and so
right.
everything that we look at is always looking from a lens, which is true in all of our lives, especially in coaching, right? Every single person, we're looking at their lives through a lens, and so we're looking at Matthew as a character through a specific lens. It's the lens that's given to us,
Right.
and from the very beginning, we're kind of, whether it's right or wrong, we're kind of given the perspective that he's kind of a jerk, that
Yeah.
he's kind of like, in fact, my one of my youngest daughter was kind of watching over my shoulder, and she's like, he wait, what? Like, she was kind of getting pulled in, and she's like, he's a jerk. Why would anybody even like want to be involved with him, right? And you see the other side of that too in the episode. You see the other guy that AD's dating, and he's like, wait, what? You're choosing between me and him, right? And so I'm curious if they had decided to put that editing in. I think that they probably were thinking people aren't going to really, I mean, already people, the way that we've edited it, or maybe how it actually happened, we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
People already don't have a connection with Matthew. Like, you want your character, you want people to be cheering for somebody.
Right.
And there are these certain personas that we think about anytime we think about any type of video production. We think about these different types of personas, and it's always interesting to me because those are sometimes the same personas that we take into our daily lives. They're just the way that we think about
Mm,
things. So oftentimes there's like a hero and there's a villain, right? And so in a television show, you have to have somebody that you're cheering for. And so if you have somebody that you're cheering for, you also have somebody that you're cheering against, right? And so when we think about that with Matthew, like they wanted us to be cheering for him, but also maybe not. I don't
Like,
know.
how do you think that they were wanting us to cheer for him though? Because I felt like their perspective was just kind of like not the underdog. Like, here's this guy that comes in with his list of questions that he's not even prepared to reciprocate with answers. It was like he's like, pick a question, and they're like, "Oh, my greatest achievement, blah blah blah. What's yours?" Oh, I'm not prepared to answer that. Like, I was like, "Wait, what? 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 No." Okay. Anyway, like to me, I kind of felt like he was set up, and I watched this the second time because I was like, this story feels disjointed to me. It looks like they're going for a very specific narrative. And I don't know, that's almost why when he said America's rooting for me, America loves the underdog, I'm like, Matthew, where are you pulling this from? Maybe it's a producer like wanting him to look even like more like a chump, but I don't know. Like I'm so confused by that.
Yeah. Well, and it was disjointed that he like because nobody else I don't know that seemed very strange to me that he was thinking about the audience and the
Mm,
people that are watching, right? The way that they design the show and the way that they've designed the production is it's very intentionally designed so that there is no outside
right.
influence. And so, and obviously we don't see the production, but everything that I've read, I looked up, I started reading how they did the production.
Yeah.
I started kind of doing some background research, and everything that I looked up, like after they send them into the dating world, of the
And the
pods,
pods.
they really are there just kind of, from what I read, observational. And to me, that is a more integrous way to do it than to
Mm.
direct storylines and then to because honestly, people we as people and you may not agree with this, but we as people
Oh,
like drama.
man, I just lost your audio.
Oh,
Okay, we might be frozen.
uh-oh.
Keep talking. I'll let you know when I can hear you again. It might,
Okay.
I'm sure it's on my end.
I don't know.
Oh,
Doesn't say
you just,
anything.
okay. I think we're back. Mine is saying unstable, but usually it does this and then it's fine again for a while.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
you were starting out by saying we as people. Sorry about
Okay.
that.
Sorry. No, you're fine. So you may not agree with this, but maybe you will. We as people like drama. Like
Mm,
that's the way our brains operate because if everything is exactly the same all the time, then it doesn't give anything excitement. So like we can see this when we voluntarily sign up for things that is going to be a little bit like dramatic or a little bit scary. Like we
yeah.
voluntarily go to an amusement park and get on this ride that takes us up a steep hill and then drops us, or we voluntarily go to a haunted house or something, or voluntarily watch a show that we're like, oh, what's going to happen, right? So we like drama. That's the way that our brains are kind of built to have at least a little bit of drama. And so I think the best way to produce a show, in my opinion, is to set people up in these situations and then allow the drama to unfold. You don't have to direct it. You don't have to like,
Ah,
especially when you have as many people as you have and as much content as you're capturing. I mean, there are 20 people who are opening themselves up who are there for 10 days to find the person that they want to spend the rest of their life with.
yeah.
That's enough drama. We don't need to like we don't need to spur it with a storyline and with a producer like
Totally.
in somebody's ear.
It just, I think what to me it kind of highlighted like Matthew's idea of himself is very different than the story that they paint on the show, which is probably different than like his idea of himself is probably a lot different than the perception of everybody in the men's quarters who you see a lot of shots of them going, oh, okay, I guess he doesn't want to talk, or like that guy holds his cards close, he won't talk to anybody about anything. And then being very surprised, like you had mentioned a little bit ago, like Clay was so surprised to hear that AD, the woman he's thinking about marrying, it's like, wait a minute, maybe I don't understand you the way I thought I understand you if you were dating me and that guy. If it was anybody else, totally good. And he points at like some random guy and he's like, even if it's you, I don't remember, guy number three, it would be fine. But that guy, no. And I mean, even that tells us something about it. Because and I don't know if you've ever had this situation before. You just when you think you know somebody really well and then they make a decision that's out of left field for you and you're like, holy cow, now I have to question everything. And then you see Clay doing this. He exhibits a lot of anger in that scene, but I think it's just such a surprise. And then he goes into kind of probably a fight or flight response and all of that. But I mean, it is like interesting to watch that play out because they do get to a point where they all think they know each other really well because of this experiment, and then something happens and they have to question everything. So,
Yeah. Oh, I love that too, because the other thing that's so interesting about this is looking at how do you like one of the things that we talk about in coaching all the time is a relationship really is the thoughts that you're thinking about somebody
mhm.
else. And so AD has these thoughts about Matthew, right? And he is saying things that in the way the lens that she's using is adding to that story, is interpreting that story. And she gets kind of that blindsided thing when she's like, wait, did he just say the exact same things to someone else that he said to me? Are these lines? Is he toying with me? And one of the things that's so interesting is she in that instance doesn't chalk it up to like this is one guy, but this is all guys, right?
Yeah, she goes all or nothing with it very quickly, which I totally get because it's not just oh, let's find somebody to like here. This is find somebody to love and get married to. So the stakes are very high, a lot of pressure on it. But yeah, I picked up on that too, where when she caught a whiff of somebody saying something to her that wasn't true, then it's like, is Clay doing it? Is all these other guys doing it? And like I can't trust any of them. Um, and she starts questioning herself versus what she could have done was just like, oh, I'm good. This guy, maybe not so good. Maybe not my guy. Maybe he's
Yeah.
recycling some things over here. Maybe he's doing something I don't like. So and we don't know. Again, we still don't know because we did not see the scenes with Amber. It could have been that this other woman is embellishing things.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what we're made to believe.
Yeah. And I haven't watched further on. I don't know. It seemed like Matthew left after that point. Um
Yeah.
and so
I've watched a little further on and yes, he does leave. Yeah.
yeah. So after that point, like we really we don't really there's not really any incentive to like engage with his character even more. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and this is something this might ruin shows for people, but this is something that you'll notice if you watch a show. One of the things that we have to do in a story arc is if people aren't there for the whole thing, we have to make sure that we hit all those feelings, all those emotions, before they leave. So, like I think about like a show like The Great British Bake Off, or like so where something like that where it's a reality show where they're going to be voted off, and so we have to make sure that we've as a producer they've wanted to like wring out all the emotions out of that person's
Mm.
story before they leave. So all these people are vetted, I'm assuming so. I mean, you usually go through a pretty extensive, most reality shows go through a pretty extensive
Yeah.
process to be vetted to be on the show. And so they want to make sure, oh, they have a really good story. And like I said, that other show that I worked on, everyone has a good story. It just takes
Right.
the skill of trying to figure out what that story is, asking the right questions, honing the right story, figuring out like what makes this person tick. Because all people are interesting. All people are fascinating when you enter from a place of curiosity. So I think in some ways they may have been like, okay, we got to wring everything we want to out of Matthew's story right now because he's going to leave. And yes, they do have a lot of other people to negotiate, to navigate. One of the shows that I worked on, was that one where we traveled with, so the producer was with us, and then there were two camera operators, and then an audio person, and then we were tailing the people that we were filming. And so we're listening, like we have cameras in the car, and then we have microphones, and we're sitting there listening to their conversation for like sometimes 5 hours at a time, right? And so it's filming almost all that time. There's so much footage, there's so much information to weed through, and so somebody has to be like flagging things and saying, okay, let's utilize this moment, let's utilize this moment, let's use this story. And so somebody made the decision that we want to follow Matthew's story at least up until this point. And maybe it's to build up AD's story, maybe it's to like, you know, make us root for her, where she's gotten to the point where she's like, oh, I just feel like I don't trust men anymore.
Right.
And she approaches that very much with Clay, right? Like he says, I want to know how you look. And she's like, that's not why I'm in this experiment. That's not why what I signed up for. I signed up for Love is Blind. I don't want people to look at me and say, yeah, you look good, so I'm going to marry you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because we were kind of speculating about that over here on our side of things. It's like, was his storyline basically to give us more context on AD? I mean, it leads me to believe that yes, that is true because they don't show Amber, because she's just this side character. Matthew's just this side character, build up hers to kind of understand a little bit more about her side of things. I don't know. I mean, like one of the other things I think is interesting about this show is like they come on this, I guess most of them have not dated this many people at one time, never without seeing each other, I would guess. But they're also like navigating the social dynamics of being with each other. Like what is it like to sort of be kind of in competition with each other in the women's quarters? What do we share? What do we not share? Do we form friendships or not? There's a lot at stake here because if you choose my man or you choose my woman, then can we still be friends? And also in 10 days, we have to make a big decision. Like there's so many different aspects of this that are like novel and different and scary, like and uncomfortable that they're trying to figure out alongside just getting to know another human being. And so it's like, I think we also have to take all of those dynamics into play is that like these aren't people in their everyday life in their everyday identity going about their routines. These are people taken completely out of all their routines and shoved in a different space with other people, which in and of itself, you could just follow somebody in the women's quarters and have a great, you could never see that anything happening in the pods and you could still have a great show. Just the cattiness that could go on or whatever. And so I think that's like the other part I find is fascinating. Like, are like what are they, what mindset are they in when they're choosing somebody? Are they choosing somebody because wow, like somebody else was going for him and I win? He picked me over her and like I feel good about that, but I don't really care about him. And I think that's where you see in the next phase of things when they are all segmented off, like they have this whole other thing to go through, which is now I have to match a face to a voice. And
Oh,
also, did I make the right choice? And was this about the person in front of me? Was it about winning this person? Or I don't even know. Like, so to me, I'm like, my brain goes in so many different directions because it's not just like a straightforward, I date this person and see what happens. There's so many other elements at play.
yeah. Which I think the thing that's so fascinating about this is that it does, like you're right, you could probably have like they could have spin-off after spin-off, right? They
Mm,
could be like, oh, and this is the inside story of the women's quarters, the inside story of the men's quarters. This is, and there are those elements that are so unique in all of this production. And the thing that I think is so interesting is it seems like from the episodes that I've watched, it seems like all of the people, they don't show a lot of cattiness in the other side,
yeah.
which I think is a production choice, right? Because obviously we know life is 50-50. So there's going to be 50-50. There's going to be
Yeah.
like
There's gonna be
moments where
positive
people
negatives.
are like, yes, where people are like, they're being really kind to each other. And then moments
Yes.
where they're going to be like, yeah, you fill in the blank. But if you think about that aspect, like they are, I think, I think about this with almost any show or almost any production. There is some overall arching premise, right? Like there is a, whether we recognize it or not, most of the time there is some sort of like mission behind this. So it just the premise of the show, Love is Blind. They're out to, and they don't say this. Sometimes it's kind of in the background, but they're out to prove that like you don't have to see each other to fall in love with each other, right?
Mhm.
And it does add a layer of complexity and also a layer of beauty. Like there's a whole montage of on one of the websites that I was looking at that is a montage of all the people seeing each other for the very first time, because this is season 6, right?
Yeah,
So they've had a lot of those opportunities, and it was so interesting to watch because some of them like start running, like as soon as the doors open they start running towards the other side because they can't get there fast enough, and some of them are like, I'm closing my eyes, I'm closing my eyes, I'm closing, okay, I'm gonna open my eyes, right? So it is this interesting study in humankind to see how people interact and how they, it really in a lot of ways is like, what are the thoughts that these people are having that it's going to lead them to the actions that they're doing. Um and it seems like all the people who they are interviewing, all the people who are in this experiment, for the majority of them it seems like they really are there for the quote right reason, to
right.
find love.
Yeah. Well, and just what you were saying there too is that like one of the things we do in coaching is like help people get out of their heads and recognize they have an entire body. A lot of us, our comfort zone is in our heads, right? And so here you have put them in a situation where they can feel like probably super comfortable in their body because they're just like, well, whatever, I'm in this room, you can't see me, you can't see my body language, all you're hearing is my voice. And so then suddenly when there's this great reveal, suddenly you have another element at play, the body. And they, some people feel really good about their bodies when they think about it. Some people don't feel as good. Some people are worried of, like, they might feel good about themselves, but they're like, well, what is the other person going to think about me? And so I think that's like another dynamic at play is when they see each other, it's, oh my gosh, all of these possible insecurities are coming up that weren't there before, or they might have been there, but now they are realized because now I have a little bit more feedback because I can see this other person's face and how they're relating to me. Um, so it's like you can fall in love with one person in a certain scenario. Like somebody could have a relationship, let's just say as a pen pal, or we only talk on the phone. You could have a relationship your entire life and never meet somebody. But that's not what's happening here. And so now we have another phase of our relationship. We have this part of our relationship that we didn't have before. Do I still love this? And everything that comes with it. And so I think that's why I just get like so excited about the show because I'm like, there's so many different aspects of human nature coming out in this. And they just kind of unfolds as we go along. Because it's like, okay, next we go to, I think they're in the Dominican Republic next, and we just get to know each other in person. You have a body, I have a body. Now let's figure out these together. I mean, the next phase after that is okay, everyday life and the humans in your everyday life that add more context to your life. And this identity that maybe I didn't see before because you were kind of in a weird experiment. Then we were kind of on vacation. Now we're kind of in real life. And so it's like there's so many layers to the onion. And it's like kind of this awesome dramatic train wreck to watch it all come together. Some of them are beautiful, but to your point from before, we do love drama, and some of it's a total train wreck. Total
Yeah.
train wreck. Some people figure it out in the next phase. They're like, okay, you have a body, I have a body. It matches the voice. We're figuring it out. I can love that part of you. And some people just don't. And it just like train wrecks from there. So, yes, I don't know. That was just my excitement coming out, Matt.
I love that. Well, and the thing that's so interesting about a train wreck is that we can't look away from it. We first,
Right.
because we as humans, we just are like, wait, what's happening? It's partially, in some ways it is just our DNA. We want to know that we're safe. We want to know that, it's that triangle. We want our brains to be efficient. We want our brains to, all those different things. We want to know that we're safe, and we want to know that we can navigate through something. And so looking at what somebody else is going through is going to give me more information about how I might navigate this situation, right?
Yes.
But the thing that's so fascinating about this is that we are always viewing everything from a specific lens. We can't physically take our eyes out of our head, and we never actually see ourselves. The only way we ever actually see ourselves is a reflection from somebody else. Even if we see ourselves in a camera or in a mirror,
Mhm.
it is still through a glass. Like there is a glass that is like the camera lens that's reflecting back to show us what we look like. There is a mirror that is a glass that's reflecting back. And then, seeing ourselves from a coaching perspective or somebody
Mhm.
else, it's always a reflection. So we never actually get to see ourselves. We may think we know ourselves really well. And in some ways, it's really powerful when we can let somebody else be that reflection and say, okay, let me just bounce this back to you. I'm sure, like, I've seen this with one of the shows that I worked on. You have to sign a release form. Like, you have to sign a release form that you're willing to be on the show, and you don't actually get to see how your story is going to be told, right? And there was one episode that I on a show that I worked on that the person, um, they refused to sign the release form, and we were like, we can't do the show. Like, the show can't air until you sign this release form. And they really wanted, almost in some ways, they wanted like power to say, well, I want my story to be told this certain way. Like, I'm worried that when my mom sees this, I'm worried that when my dad sees this, I'm worried that when, and that is kind of something that you sign up for when you sign up for a reality show. You sign up for, like, somebody else is going to put this through their lens, and they're going to interpret me as a person, whether that's good or bad. They're going to interpret me as a person through this specific lens. And I think something that we really do actually have to recognize is that that happens everywhere, all day
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
Like, we never have control over how somebody else is interpreting us through their lens, but we do have control over how we interpret ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's such a good point because throughout all of this, there's so many different things that are happening. I mean, and now as it's airing to the public, like there's a different thing happening to them as they're seeing it reflect back. And yeah, you're right. The only thing you have control over is yourself, like how you think about yourself, if you have your own back or not. Um, your willingness and openness to see things like, okay, here is another perspective. Netflix has put together this storyline of me. Like, what do I think about that? And are there some things displayed there that, like, I might need to check myself, or I might need to check in with myself or get some help around that because I didn't know I was doing that thing. Um, and that's why I think like it's amazing that people go on shows like this because I think as we have like watched reality shows over the years, we know this is going to happen. They know if they make it to TV, it's gonna happen. And then what happens next? Like, I think it would be somebody um it would be a realistic thing to say you might want a support team around you as this comes to light. And I think as we do like bigger, braver, bolder things in life, that's why it's like we can't do it alone. We have to have a support team because there's going to be a lot of things coming in ways that, yeah, we can have our back on, but there might be other things where it's like, okay, you know what? I need somebody to like shine some light on this, help me work through this. Because it is a lot. It's a lot to go through.
Totally. I loved in episode 2, I think it was, when Clay started talking, he started opening up to AD and was talking about
Yeah.
how, like, I haven't done therapy. I haven't done, I haven't cried for a long time. I just was bawling my eyes out today. Like, they obviously are trying to surround each other in some ways, in this cocoon
Mhm.
of the pods, right? And so Clay is bouncing ideas off of these people, but really it is interesting how we as people in some ways don't want to go to outside. We don't want, sometimes we don't want to seek support. We think, I can just do this on my own. I
Yeah.
can, I can figure this out. It's fine. Nobody else needs to know. And I think questioning the thoughts behind that and being like, okay, what is it behind, like, um you see a lot of emotions in these episodes. You see a lot of like there's shame, there's distrust, there's like so much happiness and excitement.
Yeah.
There's all this variation of emotions, and I think it's so interesting when we allow ourselves to feel all these emotions, and then we allow ourselves to have that support, whether that's looking outside for support or whether
Mhm.
that's at least having your own back to begin with,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then recognizing, okay, where can I get support around this thing? Like, I really am struggling. Like, think about Matthew. I mean, there, from the very beginning, why do all these people have this one image of you and
Mm.
you don't have that image of yourself? Some might say, oh, great. Like, that's fantastic that you have such a high esteem of yourself. And others might be like, okay, maybe let's take a step back.
Yeah, it's like the help me understand why all these people say one thing about you and other people say this. And it was interesting at one point Matthew did mention he was seeing a therapist and he's like, "Yeah, I only give them one word answers." And then to see her face when I told her I was going on this show, I mean,
Yeah.
that says it all, right? Like, I'm sure she was just like, oh, okay. Like, that's a reflection. That's a reflection back. But yeah, I can't tell you like how many clients I work with where I'll just offhandedly mention something like, oh yeah, I am a member of your support team. And they just are like, hold up, stop. Wait, I get a support team. Like I could gather a collection of people. It doesn't have to be like a paid coach. It can be friends, family, whatever, but just the idea of like that we as humans do not go through this alone is like for a lot of people, at least the ones I have worked with, because I mean, we're given this idea for a lot of us at some point, like, yeah, figure it out on your own, go to the store and buy it for yourself. Don't ask your neighbor, don't do this or that. And suddenly when you realize, like, okay, maybe I'm not alone. And then what does that mean? Like, it's kind of an incredible thing.
Yeah, I love that. When you were talking about that, it made me think of this movie that I was watching, and it was all about racing cars, which I'm not a big cars racing person, but it was so interesting because you see in the show in the movie, there's all this support team that, and some of them are very supportive and some of them are not quite so supportive, but they're
Mhm.
like, I'm doing my job, like I got to do my job. But I think it's so interesting when we think that we don't need a support team, or we're like, I'm an island, I'm a rock, I don't need this, I don't need anybody else's help. Like, why? Like,
Right.
why would you? Life is too short to go through experiences on your own. Like, if I've learned anything, we this last year, my sister-in-law passed away from a high speed, or not a high speed, but a bike accident. She was and she's my same age, and
Yeah.
it's been one of those things that's been like an awakening for me,
Yeah.
because she was the type of person who was like always in everybody else's support team. Like, she was always helping people, and I mean, literally, like, her funeral, there were, I want to say, 800, 1,000 people. They had to open a different section of the chapel of the church to let as many people in, who were there to celebrate her life. And it made me think about like all those connections, all those one-on-one connections that she had. And I thought about like the one-on-one connections that I had with her, like the one times when she would sit down and talk to me, right?
Yeah.
And it just shows you like the tentacles, if you will, of a person's life. Like, the way that we are all so connected, and the tendrils that connect us all, the connection that I make with you, and then the people who are listening to this podcast are and the way that it infiltrates and influences their lives, and then the way that the ripple effects that they have on other people. Like, it just is so beautiful, this web of humanity that we
Mhm.
have, and the way that we can connect with one another, and support each other. And that's really what it's about.
Yeah. Well, and you think about like just watching a show like this, it's like, okay, these are supposed to be like regular people. They're not like paid actors. I mean, this is why I'm drawn to do the podcast is I'm like, okay, let's look at the lives of other people that are very similar to you and I and then what happens next, and drop yourself into those situations. How would I think? How would I feel? How would I relate to this? What would I do if that terrible thing happened? What would I do if that joyful thing happened? I think we can learn a lot about ourselves in these scenarios. And it's just so unexpected, right? Because it's like, I always think it's interesting who we watch shows with. Sometimes it's alone, but sometimes, you have your youngest child walk up and reflect something back. It's just like, wait, that guy, Um, and it's just, I don't know, it's just we can learn things from any scenario. And and TV is and media and stuff is just one other way. And I don't know. That's why I love doing this. And oh my gosh, Matt, like I'm just like, okay, now I want this other topic, another topic, but we are we're coming to close on this. Thank you for coming on. I just knew this was going to be one of my favorite conversations, and that rang true. I'm like, okay, Matt's coming back on again for sure.
Love it.
But if somebody wanted to find out more about you, if they wanted to work with you, where would they go for that?
Oh, totally. Yeah. So my website, I have two websites. For the production side, it's periscopeproductions.com. And then mattkjar.com. My last name is spelled Kjar. It's very strange. It's Danish, but it's pronounced care, as in I care about you. And so mattkjar.com. And that's where I've actually been directing people there a little bit more because I feel so passionate. Like I love video and television production. And when I found coaching, I was like, this is the thing. Like if I could marry these two worlds, I feel like it makes such an impact on people's lives, and telling great stories is what I've always done. So anyway, yeah, mattkjar.com. And then on the socials, I think it's L Matthew Care, because my parents named me Lewis. And I've always gone by my middle name. So anyway, yeah, and Facebook and all the socials. So, and I'm sure you'll share a link in the
I
profile, all
will.
that kind of
I absolutely will. Well, any last thoughts before we close out today, Matt?
um I just I just love thinking about like that lens perspective. Like, what is the lens that you're carrying through your life? Like, are you allowing like somebody else who's like a reality show producer to direct your life, or are you actually directing it through the lens that you want to be seen and to be heard through?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I think you said it best there. I'm going to close out today. Thank you so much, Matt, for coming on. I'll have all your links in the show notes. And this has just been like wonderful nerd fest for me because I'm like, oh, I get to hear about all the sides of it. So thank you, Matt, for coming on. I appreciate it. All right.